Okay, I'm really excited to share psychological design with you guys again today. My name is Ben Sampson, and psychological design is kind of this new realm in the design world that we're beginning to utilize. We've been using it over the past couple years, but now we're getting an even bigger understanding about how it can work and how we can affect human behavior with this. So a little bit of background on myself. I've been designing for We've been designing for 5 years now. I started with apparel design, just doing logo work and stuff like that back in high school. Then coming into college, I started doing user experience and user interface design, designing mobile applications, websites, etc. And so I've always followed like the best designers in the world from Spotify, Twitter, and stuff like that. I'm almost completely self-taught, and I've taken just a few classes from Chico State, but I'm just an addict when it comes to design. So I also started a creative firm where we do design work for websites, applications, logos, and stuff like that. And if you want to see about a lot of stuff that we're going to talk about today, go to Soul ID. It's the social network for athletes. There's some team members in the audience today. And this network, we used a lot of these design principles, and I hope you guys can check it out. So what I want to start first with design is visceral reactions. And you guys all may think you have complete control over all your human behavior, but more than often not, it's not true. You don't. Visceral reactions are amazing, and designers love them because what we can do is we can give you visual stimuli that affects what's called the old brain. The old brain lies in our central cortex of our spinal cord, and what's amazing about the old brain and utilizing these design principles with this stimuli is it reacts much faster than conscious thought does. So you don't even know that it's happening, and you can only realize that it's happened after the fact that's already happened. And how this works is that we've brought on genetic traits from our ancestors for survival skills such as reproduction, food, water, shelter, and we can utilize this kind of stimuli to make you have these visceral reactions. So what's great about this for designers is we can predict the behavior that you're going to have when you see this kind of stimuli, and what's also amazing about it is it's very transparent across all genders, demographics, geographical areas. It works for almost everybody, and it's very consistent. More often than not, we're really exposed to a lot of sex cells, that kind of reproduction kind of stimuli. Carl's Jr. used this a lot, started a few years ago. Craft, let's get zesty. This was a big ad campaign, and they increased conversion by 40% just by utilizing this. And one of my favorite pieces, find the hottest tech talent with Alex. So poking fun at the idea that we can utilize this kind of visual stimuli and have these kind of visceral reactions with people. The next thing I want to talk about is cost-benefit analysis. And all our actions and all our activity that we do in our day-to-day life can basically be broken down by the perceived cost of something in relation to the perceived value. Our brains are incredibly good at being very, very efficient. We're efficient beings, and when our brain works, it's very, very taxing. So we do everything we possibly can to be as efficient as possible. Another thing that I want to touch on is that we can basically break human behavior into two key categories: opportunity seeking and threat avoidance. Take a moment and think about all the activities that you do in your day-to-day life. They usually relate to one of these two things. Opportunity seeking, looking for a raise, looking for promotion, looking to travel. Threat avoidance, having a family, being surrounded with your friends. All that translates back to what our ancestors did, and it works with us today. And so when it comes to cost-benefit analysis, the most common form that we see in my world, a good example is form fatigue. And so when we come in, we see a visual representation of something, we subconsciously do a cost-benefit analysis always. And you guys, if you think about it now, probably realizing that now. When I go through websites and I'm looking through websites, I'm bouncing out of websites because the effort it takes to get the value that I need is too great. And so I'm constantly bouncing out of websites when I'm doing analysis or something like that. And so form fatigue is a good example because the longer the form, the more value we need to give the end user or the end customer. And so we can create formulas for this, but really the key thing that you need to take away is that if you're going to have a lot of cost and a lot of effort needed to reach your end product, you need to have a lot of value to give to your end user or your end consumer. And so cost-benefit analysis can really move right into Hicks' law. And Hicks' law states the more options that an end user or an end consumer has, the more difficult it is for them to make that decision, and many times they'll even abandon the decision. And so you guys have probably seen this many times before, but a case study that I really like is one that Harvard did with jams. And so they set up a display of jams in a grocery store. And the 24 jam display, 60% passing tried because it's more attractive. There's more items available, and you can see a lot more jams, obviously. But only 3% purchased. When they did 6 jams, as you can see the numbers up there, the conversion was 10x. And so the reason for that is, once again, our brain is working to be very efficient. And if we overwhelm the brain and we give them too many options, they won't be able to digest that content. And so they give up, they abandon it. So it's really important. And we kind of wrap around this whole conversation to simple really sells. The simpler we can make a process, the simpler we can make our procedures, the easier it is for the consumer to purchase our products. And In-N-Out's one of my favorite examples. They're fantastic at this. They have 3 items on their menu: cheeseburger, double cheeseburger, and burger. So, and along with their secret menu, which is fantastic. And next thing I want to talk to you guys about is Gestalt principles. And so when we explore into cognitive psychology, we can quickly debunk the thought that we have a really good grasp and understanding of the world around us. We really don't. Our brain loves to take shortcuts, and our brain loves to make associations with things that aren't related. Our brain's always doing this to go back to that principle of being very, very efficient. And so we see this a lot in design, and we use it in design all the time. The most common form of this is proximity. We use this more than anything. In design, if we bring something that's of an item and then bring another item that's completely unrelated, you relate them in your mind more often than not. Similarity and common region are 2 other really big ones, but proximity is by far the greatest. Apple has a good example. They have Beats headphones that they own, and when you see an Apple device next to Beats headphones, you want those 2 things. They're completely unrelated, but you relate them in your mind because you see them together, and that's what proximity does. We do a lot of relation that way. Pattern matching is really fascinating, and we use this a lot. So pattern matching is recognizing shapes from the written word to facial expressions. And so despite the lack of detail in this shape, you're able to tell that's a baseball player. And when you see visual stimuli, when you see any kind of pattern, your brain starts a chain reaction when you see that stimuli. And you go through your entire memory bank and pull through any kind of experiences that you've had in the past of baseball. So think about your first couple seconds just looking at that pattern. You probably thought about, hopefully going to Giants games, or playing baseball with your dad, or the smell of grass. We can trigger all these kinds of behaviors and all these kinds of emotions with visual stimuli. And I use this a lot when I do app design. If we're doing a new mobile application, we can look for apps that are really popular, like Instagram, take those kinds of visual stimuli and those patterns that people have already identified with and recognize really well, and bring them into this new application so that the transfer process into the new mobile application is a lot easier. Say you have a completely new shape, a new pattern that people haven't seen, you get really uncomfortable when you see it. And that's because you can't identify with it and you have no past experiences with that pattern. So if you have a new design, something completely off the wall, you definitely want to show it to people as many times as they can, because the more times somebody sees a pattern, the more times they can save it in their memory bank, and the more more associations they'll be able to have with it. And that leads from pattern recognition into facial recognition. And there's no pattern that we recognize more and that has the impact of the human face. We're a socially driven race. So the reason we identify with faces and we're always looking for people's faces is for 2 reasons. 1 is to identify the other human being, and 2, to identify if they're a friend or foe. That's what our ancestors did. That's what we are always looking to do. Faces that are angry or sad or aggressive grab our attention much faster, and it's much more effective because they come off that our defense settings come on, and we honestly get our attention grabbed. And that's why this ad is one of my favorites by far. That stare really grabs your attention because it's an aggressive face. And so the designer really utilized that in this. And I also like how they utilize the red here, which really inspires urgency. As you guys may think by now, why does red inspire urgency? What color is it when you bleed? It's red. That's why red lights work really well. It inspires that defensive mechanism. And so faces are amazing. And faces really set the theme for a website or a design as well. And we're, like I said, a very socially driven race. So when we see other people interacting with a product or service, we feel safe to use that product or service. And that comes into social influence as well. So beside the fact of just facial recognition, there's a number of other social tools that we can utilize to help our end user and our end customer make more buy decisions. And so I'm a huge fan of the designer, Elisa Delgado, and she's a user experience designer, and she has done incredible work over the last 6 years. But she basically created these 6 laws of social influence that we can utilize in our designs. And so reciprocation, when we give something to somebody, the other party often wants to give back, many times in more value. You see a lot of campaigns for 30 days free, try this product free. That's all the reciprocation technique. Authority, we trust people that are experts in their field. And if we can display that in design work, that we are experts at this and the design is very clean and professional, it conveys that we're experts and we have the authority in this area. Commitment and consistency. We have to identify our target market that this design work is going to go to, and we have to identify what their values are. Values are very important to people. If we can identify those values and design according to those values, it becomes very important. Scarcity. If you're doing any kind of an e-commerce business or you're selling any kind of a product, scarcity is incredibly effective and it's proven over and over again. If I'm on Amazon, I'm looking at like trailers or something like that, there's only 2 left. I want to buy one because there's only 2 left because our ancestors, you know, when there were scarce resources, they wanted to get as much of it as they could. And we still try and do that today. So scarcity works incredibly well. Liking. If you like somebody, you're more often than likely to say yes to them. That's why you see a lot of celebrities brought into design work and stuff like that, that kind of facial recognition with liking. And then social proof, that's my favorite one by far. We are a socially driven race once again. And when we see other people using a product or service, we feel safe to use that product or service. We have that social proof. I bow down on my knees to every single early adopter that's ever come onto a new product or service because it's incredibly hard, because it's incredibly scary. We're hardwired not to do that. We're hardwired to have social proof before we jump into something. Selective disregard and change blindness. So we may think that when we see everything around us that we can comprehend and take in every single object that we see, but we can't because our brains are working to be incredibly efficient and pulling only the items that are incredibly effective in that activity. And so a really good example that I like is if you're in a brand new town and you're told to go to Main Street and you're driving to Main Street, you're going to identify every single sign on your way to Main Street. You'll see that. But if you're in Chico and you're told to go to the rec, you're not going to notice a single road sign. And that's that selective disregard system at work. Our brain is working to be very, very efficient and conserve as much energy as we possibly can. And so what I see in my field is a lot of what's called banner blindness, which is this new shift in advertising where people are going to websites and they come out of the websites and they do these studies and will ask, did you see any advertising? They don't know because they were blind to it. They can't remember at all if they saw any kind of advertising whatsoever. It's causing a dramatic shift in the advertising field right now. And we're seeing a lot of prices drop in advertising. So that's a whole nother talk in itself, just about banner blindness. But another more scary form of blindness is complete change blindness. And so this is a real thorn in a designer's side because you can make a change in the design and people won't notice it unless it's incredibly pertinent to their activity compared to like what they want. And so when you're doing big design changes, you need to make it very, very obvious to your end user that this is changing, this is what's new, and this is the new value that you're going to get from that. So there's some cool videos that we can watch on change blindness. I won't bore you with you guys today, but I really encourage you just to YouTube change blindness videos. They're really, really funny. And the last kind of topic that I want to talk to you guys about is progress disclosure. Progress disclosure is basically content is king, but it's all about how we deliver that content. Our brain easily gets overwhelmed and we can only consume content in short bursts. And so it's important that we make content incredibly easy to digest. And that kind of all wraps around simple cells. And I like this statement here. To conserve energy, people prefer to recognize the information rather than store and recall it. When we store memories, it's incredibly taxing. It takes hundreds of functions in the brain. And mental activity is just as taxing as physical activity. If you're working really hard mentally to consume content, you might find yourself get really, really hungry, just as hungry as if you go on a run. That's because it's just as taxing. It's a lot of work for the brain. So simple will always sell. And just remember, like, content is king, but you have to deliver it the right way or it's completely ineffective. You're wasting all of your time. And so psychological design is creating this massive shift right now in how we're designing. We're learning new stuff every day, and we're designing new things, and we're getting smarter as designers. And this is how our world is going to be designed. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Ben. That was really cool.